In Henry IV, Part 1, we can see how Shakespeare's exploration of power and the right to rule, family and loyalty, honour and redemption, gender and language and rhetoric reflects aspects of the world as it was when Shakespeare wrote this play. Let's start with a few facts about the play itself. It was written in the late 1590s and is part of a tetralogy, or series of 4 plays, known as the Henriad. The series includes Richard II, Henry IV Part 1, Henry IV Part 2, and Henry V. The Henriad is about the rise of the Royal English House of Lancaster. It also depicts the coming of age of Henry of Monmouth, but we know him better as Hal, the Prince of Wales. When composing the Henriad, Shakespeare drew on historical sources like Holinshed's Chronicles, but altered details where it suited the story. He was also careful not to degrade the Lancasters, who are the ancestors of Queen Elizabeth I. She was England's ruling monarch during Shakespeare's time, which is why it's called the Elizabethan period. But since the Virgin Queen had no heir, the crisis of succession was a real royal drama. Her death would leave a power vacuum. Could it be filled without civil war and bloodshed? Shakespeare addresses this anxiety from the get-go in Henry IV Part 1. King Henry's opening lines express how shaken and weary everyone is from the civil wars of the early 1400s. By the late 1590s, when this play was first performed, England was enjoying relative peace and stability, but war was still in living memory. Less than 30 years earlier, in 1569, the Northern Earls, including the Percy family, tried to depose Queen Elizabeth and put Mary, Queen of Scots, on the throne. They were unsuccessful, but the depiction of the Northern rebels in King Henry IV, Part 1, would have hit home. Any London play that praised stability and punished political agitators was bound to be a crowd pleaser. Not only was it useful propaganda for Queen Elizabeth, but it was also comforting for commoners who don't enjoy being food for powder. Thus, the question of who has the power and the right to rule in England is prominent in Henry IV Part 1. While King Henry is certainly powerful, the legitimacy of his claim to the throne is debatable. In Act 3, Scene 2, he explains to Hal how he strategically undermined Richard II before usurping him. Usurpers, or people who take power by force, tend to end up on the wrong side of history, but that's only if they fail and lose their heads for high treason. Henry Bolingbroke, on stage as in real life, was a winner, despite the constant plots, rebellions and assassination attempts against him. He was one tough nut. It's true that the real King Henry IV successfully overthrew King Richard II. Only 2 previous English monarchs had pulled off that stunt, William the Conqueror in 1066 and a guy called Stephen in 1135. Compared to these buccaneers, Queen Elizabeth I was squeaky clean. What's interesting is the way Shakespeare humanises King Henry in the play. Sure, he's overzealous to the point of provoking the Percys' revolt. But Shakespeare also depicts him as a shrewd and proactive ruler, an eloquent speaker, a valiant warrior, and a proud, loving father. Thus, Shakespeare challenges us. Can King Henry's noble qualities allow us to overlook the way he came to power? Given that King Henry's wish for civil peace echoes Queen Elizabeth's own, Shakespeare's audience probably said yes. What do you think? While you ponder that, let's consider another aspect of Elizabethan society, the family unit. Families in those days were close-knit, patriarchal, and the value of filial piety, or loyalty to one's parents, was culturally entrenched. Since England was a Christian society, the biblical commandment of honour thy father and mother was taken very seriously. Shakespeare explores the theme of family and loyalty in a few different ways. Although the play is set in the early 1400s, the relationships between fathers and sons, uncles and nephews, brothers and husbands and wives are recognisable to anyone. The principal relationship is between King Henry and his wayward son, Prince Hal. At the start of the play, Hal seems more attached to his surrogate father, Falstaff, and his mates from the Boar's Head Tavern. But Hal's emerging sense of duty and King Henry's impassioned appeal in Act 3, Scene 2 pull Hal into line. Then we have Harry Hotspur. His intense, unwavering loyalty to the Percy family leads him to disaster. Shakespeare also grants us a peek into Hotspur's marriage to Lady Kate Percy. She's crazy about her husband, despite his hot-headedness, or maybe because of it. Then we have the honeymooners, Mortimer and his Welsh wife, Lady Catherine Mortimer. By depicting the private and public worlds of his characters, Shakespeare humanises them, especially those who are meant to be the antagonists or bad guys. They may be high-born and influential, but they're governed by the same emotions and family ties as everyone else. That way, even the poorest audience member standing in the muddy pit of the Globe Theatre can be moved by the characters' depth and moral complexity. Shakespeare's audience are also entertained by the promise of action in this play. That's where we see his exploration of honour and redemption. As Hal and Hotspur journey towards their climactic confrontation, the word honour is on everyone's lips. Since the play focuses on matters of state, honour is mostly explored in the context of the chivalric code. Traditionally, chivalry wasn't just about having impeccable manners, it was a strict code of conduct for medieval knights and noblemen. In addition to courage and fairness in battle, the chivalric code was about defending Christianity and the church, protecting the weak, being loyal to your country, having integrity, being generous with your wealth, upholding your obligations, and, last but not least, being devoted to your lady. Okay, so maybe chivalry was more of a romantic ideal. Have you heard of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table? That 12th century legend put chivalry on the map in England. Also, battle-hardened knights was still a thing in Elizabethan England, so honour was still a compelling theme for Shakespeare's audience. If we placed each of the play's main characters along a spectrum of chivalry, how would they measure up? Hotspur was chivalrous but hot-headed. King Henry was a usurper but a bold leader. Worcester was brave but deceitful. And Falstaff thinks honour is an empty word. And can we consider Prince Hal as honourable and chivalrous, considering his rocky start? Hal's glittering reformation in Act 4 is one for the ages. William Blake even painted it. Hal's character arc, or inner journey in the story, resembles the biblical parable of the prodigal son. This is a famous story from the Book of Luke, highly recognisable to an Elizabethan audience. You know the one. The disgraced, wayward son comes crawling back to his father, begging for forgiveness. The father quickly forgives him, and everyone rejoices in the son's redemption. Can you see the parallel with Hal? It's the prodigal son retold for English politics. All this honour and chivalry makes Henry IV Part 1 a play dominated by aggressive male energy. But this doesn't stop Shakespeare from exploring the theme of gender. Even though there are only 3 female characters, they add important emotional texture to the play. When we think of Elizabethan women, it's easy to imagine them as a bit downtrodden. It's true that Elizabethan society was patriarchal. and women lived within restrictive boundaries. But Shakespeare offers us more nuanced representation of femininity in Henry IV, Part 1. Lady Kate Percy loves Hotspur passionately, but threatens to break his finger. Mistress Quickly serves Falstaff faithfully, but calls him out for his dishonesty and duplicity. And Lady Mortimer wishes she was a soldier, then enchants everyone with a Welsh song. Ultimately, these ladies are still subject to the whims of men, but Shakespeare makes sure they have a voice. Through them, we get a more rounded impression of English life and the dynamics between men and women. Lady Percy and Lady Mortimer also challenge misogynistic Elizabethan stereotypes of the submissive wife, the shrew, and the Welsh witch. Okay, so they would have been played by young male actors on the Elizabethan stage. But would that have lessened Lady Percy's sincerity or Lady Mortimer's mystical charm? What do you think? Speaking of young male actors, that's how Shakespeare started out in the London theatre scene. After getting married at 18, having 3 kids, and doing something during his lost years, Shakespeare was a fully fledged thespian by the time he was 28. William Shakespeare lived and worked during the Golden Age in English history. That's because it was a period of relative peace, prosperity, and accomplishment, particularly in the artistic sphere. The flourishing of the arts during this time was all part of the English Renaissance. But let's be honest. Theatre was the real drawcard of the period, and the playwrights and actors were the rock stars. And who composed better language and rhetoric than William Shakespeare? Have you noticed how the language shifts in Henry IV, Part 1? Depending on a character's class or region, they could be speaking prose, verse, or Welsh. Remember, prose is ordinary language, spoken or written in sentences and paragraphs. This differs from verse, which is more structured language with a metrical rhythm and possibly some rhyme. Shakespeare differentiates between the commoners, who speak in prose, and the high-born characters, who speak in verse. Interestingly, Hal speaks in both, which depicts him as a shrewd and practical politician. Elizabethan England had a strict social hierarchy, and one's class was recognisable through things like speech, dress, and how many armed attendants you had. By representing various social classes and regions through language, Shakespeare makes his play enjoyable for all. From the cushioned aristocrats in the Lord's Rooms at the Globe Theatre to the poorest groundlings in the pit, Henry IV Part 1 has universal appeal. But the play's rhetoric really blows our minds. The art of rhetoric has its roots in ancient Greece and Rome, where talented speakers influenced the course of history. Fast forward to the English Renaissance, and the classics were experiencing a revival. The memorable speeches in Henry IV Part 1 are an eye-watering combination of Shakespeare's genius and the teachings of Aristotle, Quintilian, and Cicero. The better the rhetoric, the more power and authority a character has. So, when Henry IV delivers his monologues or extended speeches in Act 3, Scene 2, you'd better believe it's a turning point in the play. Then again, Falstaff's rhetoric is just as captivating, and he pooh-poohs power and authority. He brings rhetorical magic and comic relief to the play in the tradition of the fool. Fools are recurring characters in Shakespeare's plays, often in the form of a courtly jester or clever commoner. They crack jokes and clown around, but they also challenge us with the truth. Falstaff's catechism in Act 5, Scene 1 is a top example. Fools are irresistible due to their razor-sharp wit and ability to outsmart the high-born characters. So, which would you rather be? The chivalrous, honour-bound knight, or the cheeky, intelligent fool? Great job, team! In this lesson, we've covered how aspects of Shakespeare's context are reflected in the themes of power and the right to rule, family and loyalty, honour and redemption, gender, and language and rhetoric in Henry IV Part 1. You're now ready to write awesome paragraphs and make Shakespeare proud. We hope you enjoyed this Schooling Online production. For more easy lessons, check out our other videos.